I had been looking forward to a quiet weekend away from everything. A chance to recharge in a remote mountain cabin I rented near the foothills of the Rockies. The place was tucked away on a narrow, winding road with tall pines all around, and it was early winter. It was just a light dusting of snow when I arrived, enough to give the landscape a magical glow without making travel too difficult. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. Serene mornings with soft sunlight filtering through the trees, evenings by the fireplace, and the only sounds being the wind and the occasional rustle of wildlife outside. I felt completely isolated, but in a good way. It was just me and the peaceful surroundings. On the morning of the third day, I was sitting at the kitchen table sipping hot coffee when I heard a soft knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone and couldn't imagine who might be out there, so I hesitated a moment before getting up. When I opened the door, I saw a man standing in the cold. He was bundled up in a heavy coat and a knitted cap, his cheeks rosy from the chill. He had a kind but slightly distant look in his eyes. "Sorry to disturb you," he said, his voice gentle. "I seem to have lost my way. Could you point me in the direction of the nearest town?" I was surprised. This was the middle of nowhere, and the man's presence here was odd. Still, I gave him the directions as clearly as I could, watching as he nodded and thanked me before disappearing into the snowy landscape. I went back inside feeling a mix of confusion and mild concern, but I shrugged it off as nothing more than a lost traveler looking for help. That evening, as the day turned to dusk, I noticed something odd outside. I was sitting near a window, watching the snow begin to fall a bit heavier than before, when I caught a glimpse of fresh footprints along the edge of the porch. They weren't there before, and their shape made me think someone had been walking around the back of the cabin. I couldn't help but wonder if it was the same man from earlier, perhaps circling the cabin before knocking on the door. The thought unsettled me, and I double-checked that all the windows and doors were locked. I tried to relax, turning on a movie to distract myself, but the unease wouldn't leave me. Around midnight, as I was drifting into a light sleep, I heard a soft, deliberate knock at the front door again. My heart pounded as I froze in the darkness. The knocking was quiet, almost hesitant, as if someone wasn't sure if they should be there. I listened for a moment, half expecting to hear him ask for directions once more. But instead, there was only silence punctuated by the howling wind outside. I got out of bed and crept to the window to peek outside. Through the frosted glass, I saw a set of footprints leading up to the porch once again. But this time they ended right at the door, and there was no sign of the stranger retreating. I felt a chill far worse than the cold as I realized someone was lingering near my home. I grabbed my phone and called 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. They said help was on the way, but it would take about 10 minutes. Locked in the safety of the living room, I listened to the relentless wind and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Every creak of the cabin seemed amplified in the silence. Then suddenly, there was a loud thump from the roof. My breath caught in my throat. I could hardly believe my ears. The sound was heavy, deliberate, like someone had jumped onto the roof. Moments later, I heard urgent voices outside. The door rattled as I heard someone shout for me to get down. Through a small gap in the curtains, I managed to see red and blue lights flashing across the snow. Relief washed over me as the realization set in. The police had arrived. I stayed by the door until an officer's voice boomed through the night, telling me to stay put. A few minutes later, the officer emerged cautiously onto the porch. From what I could see, the man hadn't left. Instead, he had somehow gotten onto the roof, hovering silently above my home as if he'd been watching all along. The officer's tone was firm and no nonsense as he ordered the man to come down. I watched, heart hammering in my chest as the stranger slowly climbed down, his movements deliberate and oddly calm despite the situation. It turned out he was a local who had been wandering around the area, but his behavior that night was hard to explain. He didn't offer any answers when questioned, only a vague statement about just trying to find a place to rest. Even after the police took him away, the unsettling feeling lingered with me long after he was gone. I spent the rest of the night awake, questioning every sound and shadow. Even now, when I think back to that night, the feeling of being watched in complete isolation sends a shiver down my spine. I left the cabin the next day with more questions than answers, and a deep sense of unease that I haven't been able to shake off.